One of the great things about plastering a straw bale house is that it's a great community event. Most anybody can use their hands and put plaster on the wall. It doesn't take a whole lot of skill, but it's a great way to bring friends and community and neighbors together. Anyone can put on some gloves and use their hands and put the plaster on the wall. And there's a little bit of skill involved in like finishing it out, but those of us that have done it before are kind of coming behind and doing that finish work. But the most time-consuming part is getting it all onto the wall, and so anybody can help out with that. So for the brown coat plaster, it's important to get your recipe right, and there's some pretty tried and true ratios of things that you can go by or start with. And the binder for this particular project is clay, so we're doing an earthen plaster. So the materials are clay, aggregate, and straw. And so what I did was I got some materials. I had to go around to a couple of different quarries and see what kind of materials they offered. What I wound up getting was just a fill dirt. And it was basically just, I wanted to make sure it didn't have any topsoil in it or any silt. So this is mostly a mix of rocks and sand and clay, and they had sifted it down already to 1/2 inch at least. And so I made up some samples with that mix just to see how much clay was in it and see what we needed to do. So I wound up making a sample board here, which is really important to do. And so I have 3 different mixes, and this first one is just the fill dirt. So I just made this with some straw and I let it dry in the sun or over a couple of days. I wanted to see what its reaction would be. And you can tell that it shrunk quite a bit away from the edges, and there's a lot of big cracks in it. And that to me just says that there's more clay than needs to be in there. So next I tried 3 of the fill dirt, 1 of the sand, and 1 straw. And it shrunk a lot less, but it still had some kind of bigger cracks in it. So I upped the sand 1 more time, and we've got 3 of the dirt, the fill dirt with the clay in it, 2 of the sand, and 2 of the straw. And so that's the recipe that we decided to go with. So I made it on a big card so that my folks out here know what the recipe is. And we have big piles and buckets, and we're using a mortar mixer. And the straw that we're using is the leftover straw that came from inside, but we chopped it up so that it's finer or shorter pieces. So we just took straw, the leftover straw, put it in a garbage can, and used a weed whacker to chop it up inside the garbage can. So the sand we're using is, it's a coarse sand. So at our particular quarry, they called it a coarse concrete sand. And then they said that the masonry sand was actually a finer sand. Since this is a brown coat, we're going pretty thick with the plaster, at times maybe up to 3/4 of an inch. We wanted a thicker, coarser sand. It helps just create more structure for the plaster. If we were doing a really fine coat, then I would want the smaller, finer sand. So when you're first starting to apply the plaster, we're starting with this brown coat at the base of the wall because we're going all the way down to the floor. So we're trying to build out that very bottom and starting at the base of the wall and just kind of using the palm of your hand to work all the way up the wall. And so we're using a spray bottle with water in it, and we're just moistening the straw and any parts that have clay slip on it. It just helps the plaster to adhere to the straw better. So in this room, we are just starting a new wall. So we're starting at the bottom of the wall here, and one of our volunteers who can't really spend time on the floor is kind of working on the sides of the windows. But we're starting at the bottom of the wall and just working our way up the wall there. So you can see that Blaine has found like a hole in the straw, and she's actually trying to fill it. And sometimes if you find a really big hole like that, you can fill it up with loose straw and dry straw first, and then kind of come over it with the with the plaster. But she's working it into the straw right there with her fingers because the straw feels a little bit loose and it's not really grabbing onto the plaster real well. So she's going to work it in with her fingers and then come back and smooth over it. So this is one of those areas where the plaster just wasn't adhering very well to the straw. We did this area yesterday and we came back today and noticed that it had sort of slumped on the wall. So there was like a crack that was visible. And that was because the plaster was so thick, it wasn't really being supported by the straw bales. So we came in today and just worked our fingers in through the thick plaster and just kind of incorporated it into the straw bales behind it. So that'll help make it stronger. We're gonna let this set up for a bit and then we'll be able to come back now and put another second coat on top of it. And that second coat will kind of work into the holes and it'll key in and it'll be stronger and we'll be able to support the weight. So we have the top of the window bevels that we made out of the lath so that we could stuff loose straw in above all the windows and the doors. And it's a little bit trickier to plaster that area just because you're having to plaster above your head. So Ben is actually taking a bit of our plaster mix and he's mixing it with a little bit more of just the straw, like full straw. And he's going to use that and kind of really work it in and around each of the lath strips that are up there. And so the straw just sort of helps key the plaster onto those lath strips so that it can defy gravity, basically. So with some of those bevels, we have to do sort of a thin layer at first. So like this one, you can see it's kind of lumpy. It doesn't look real finished yet, and that's because it just has its sort of thin first layer on it. And we're letting that sit up for a while first, and then we'll come back and do another layer over the top of it with a trowel. So this is one of the headers that has the second coat on it. So you can see the difference between the first one and the second one. It's nice and smooth and pretty. So the skill comes in finishing out. So creating the shapes, creating the right bevels around the windows, coming back with the wooden floats and smoothing out and finding the low spots and the high spots. So what we're doing is we had the straw bales shaped in the right shape that we wanted to go with, sort of a basic shape behind here. And then a lot of this is just sort of sculpting mud. So we are spending a lot of time making sure that these are the shape that we want them to be. And we're not using tape measures and levels necessarily, but we are just using our eyes a lot. So we'll put mud on, smooth it over, stand back, kind of look at the whole picture. Does it look like there's any bulges? Is it the bevel the right shape that we want it to be? So we spend a lot of time smoothing out and getting that to look right. And it's not going to be perfect. This is straw bale and natural materials. And but part of the beauty of living in a space like this is this small undulations, the fact that it is a handmade product. And it just sort of, it creates a more comfortable environment to be reminded that this is a natural project and that many hands made this. So the great thing about this plaster is you're basically just sculpting the shape of the wall. So you can create a lot of different shapes that you want. So we carved out these niches in the wall with a grinder back when it was just a straw bale wall. And we created these cool little shelves that come out from the niche so that she can use it as a shelf and put some things on it later. And so we were able to build this whole shelf out just using the plaster and the straw, clay, sand mix. The only thing that I did to help support it structurally was I took some long landscape staples and worked it into the straw bales and left them sticking out of the straw bales about an inch maybe, and then just sort of worked a straw heavy mix in around those pins and let that dry, and then we came back and just sort of built this out on top of it. And we haven't had any problems. It's been really easy to make this. So you can do all sorts of designs and work with the plaster. You could, make a shape or on the top of this if you wanted to. So speaking of taking a lot of time to figure out the details, I just noticed this in this corner here. If you were to stand back and look, you can tell that there's like it's straight from here up, but right in here it dips in quite a lot. And so I want to come back in and fix that. So that's just one of the things that we spend a lot of time just sort of standing back and looking at the big picture to see, how does it look? How does it feel? Is there anything that we need to adjust? Do we need to build anything out or take anything down? For this ADU, we built a partition wall that showcases both lath and plaster and wattle and daub techniques. And wattle and daub is just a more ancient form of lath and plaster. And we use the same kind of plaster on both of these surfaces as we did on the straw bale walls. The wattle we made out of some bamboo and some elderberry and some other invasive species that we found around that just had long, skinny, flexible branches that we could weave in between upright branches. And we used some salvaged screws and nails as what we call spragging along the end of the wall so that we could actually build out sort of a rounded edge there. And then along the branch, we actually used a staple gun and little staples as the spragging, which allowed the plaster there something to key onto. After we had the base brown coat up on the lath and plaster and the wattle and daub, then Reed actually came in and artistically sculpted a tree branch across the face of this wall just as a relief in the plaster.